There was a certain intensity of waking up in the car at the time, and there were lights on all outside the car. It had gone dark. And I looked down at my shirt, and there was blood all over the shirt. Looked up, and I remember going in and out of consciousness. And the ambulance drivers were pulling me out, but I don't remember coming out of the car. I must have gone unconscious again. But I do remember when they were lying me down on the stretcher, I was seeing a golden hazy light everywhere. And I started asking them about everybody else. Is the other driver okay? Are my friends okay? And there was no awareness of any pain in my body. I was just simply singing in a different space. And then I started speaking to the ambulance drivers about what the world needs. I had peace and harmony and all sorts of things. I went into a whole dialogue and they started chuckling. That I remember. They probably thought I was drunk or on drugs or something. And I was, but not what they thought. And then I very vaguely remember my dad taking me home from the hospital. I have a vague memory of even being in the hospital. And my father was a police officer and he didn't want me to be in the hospital for very long, so he pulled me out with his authority without them washing off the blood, doing any check on my head or anything like that. And the skin on the left-hand side of my eyebrow was ripped open, and that's where the steering wheel had hit me and clipped me under here and then hit my eyebrow. So in a sense I could have had my head knocked off if it wasn't for some mystery entering my body and pushing the car right back and bending the bolts to the front seat. This is an E.J. Holden, by the way, we're talking about, so very strong head-on collision. Now even as I talk about it, I sense an energy shift in my body, because it's like I start to somehow evoke that memory inside the body, because it's not so far away from me, that experience still to this day. I was 19 and that's like only a few years ago. and so my father cleaned me up, wouldn't let mum see me. So I never got any checking out by the doctors. There's been damage to the left-hand side of the head. There was possibly about 3/4 numb for many, many years. But for the next 3 years, I was still at home because of the accident. And I was having many, many, what do you call it, mystical experiences happening at home. Mum was listening to them every so often. She was aware of it. And sometimes I'd have an energy rush and I'd just be running from one room to another, because I'd be feeling an extraordinary rush of bliss. Tremendous energy. I was just overjoyed for no reason at all. And then sometimes I'd be talking to Mum in the kitchen when she'd be making a cake or something or making food. I'd be staring out the window and then my eyes were still open and everything would disappear. There was no even awareness of me looking at anything, but I'm still standing, not falling over. I'm not sure how to explain that, other than maybe it's a form of a momentary samadhi, the satori that was happening. And then Mum would yell out to me saying, "Are you having another one of your spiritual experiences?" And she'd bring me back, I'd go, "Mum," and I start describing to her what just happened. And she'd just say, "That's lovely, dear." As mothers do, you know. So during those 3 years, for the first month after the accident, I was lying on a layback bed like this sort of thing, with my feet up. And every day I was having a lot of massive sweats. My body was going through a purification. I had to change my clothes a number of times through the day. And that happened for about 2 to 3 weeks, I think, actually. And for the first 6 months or so, I'd be just watching TV. I didn't want to go anywhere, didn't want to move. And I'd be sitting in front of the TV for 6 to 8 or more hours every day. And that became my meditation, because it would enter me, bring me into a space of stillness. Because I'd just be gazing, watching. Then after a while, I started to notice that I was getting bored with certain TV shows because I'd watched them so many times. So I'd look up at the wall, and I started enjoying gazing at the wall. Then I look back down at the TV and look at the wall again and go, oh my goodness, doesn't matter what I look at. So I just enjoyed sitting back at the wall for a while. But if anything decent came on, I'd then watch it for a bit, but then I'd be looking at the wall again and going into this incredible peacefulness. And I would try to describe that to my mother. But it was very obvious that something to do with stillness, something to do with peace, was already there, so to speak. I was given a huge quantum leap opportunity to jump into it through that car accident. So I'll just speak of what has brought me up to this stage, I guess, in some sense. Sometimes around that time when I was walking down the hill down to the markets, about 1.5 miles down the hill in Croydon, Ringwood area of Victoria, if anybody knows that area. Yeah.
I lived at Wonga Park, Croydon West.
Croydon West.
Kilsyth.
So I'd be walking down there, and all of a sudden I'd feel a presence around me. I'd be looking around like this. It's like a very strong presence. Not like it was a spirit entity, but it was like this huge presence around me. And all of a sudden it just gets so strong, I'd feel like this exhilaration, and I'd shriek out. Not yell, but shriek. Like with no, not like that. You've got your phone on still. I like pauses though. That's good, thank you. And then all of a sudden the energy would shoot into me, and I'd just start sprinting with tremendous energy, like I was being filled. At the time I felt like I was just being filled with the Spirit. And as I look back into it now, it was like having moments of grace, being graced by Holy Spirit, as the Christians call it. And in a true sense it is that, but not in necessarily, I don't look at it in a Christian manner. I look at it in a Christic manner, which is a little different, but not Christian. Some of you may understand my language, I'm not sure. Sorry if I do tread on toes by speaking like this. But for me, a reality of the Christic spirit, what they call the Spirit of Christ, so to speak, the Christic spirit that we all have access to, was revealing itself through this. So I started a meditation. I decided to go to the Victorian Spiritual Union at the age of 21, which is the spiritualist union, where they study, of course, mediumship, psychic development, hands-on healing, colour therapy, communication with extraterrestrial intelligences, all that sort of thing. And I did a 12-month course in mediumship development. And because of the car accident, it was natural for me to be able to open circuit, so to speak, and become a medium. And it was a very special and unique experience to have an overshadowing by what I'd call a celestial intelligence, seemingly separate to myself. But it was very, very obvious it was a happening. And even my teacher at the time acknowledged that I had a natural openness because of the car accident, so she said, just allow it for a while, but you will move on from that at some point. And after several months I did. I stopped the mediumship of any separate individual entity, so to speak. I had to expand a bit further. And during that time, I decided to start meditating at home also. So as I entered my 22nd year, after about 3 months of the meditation, I was gazing at a candle gazing, called Tratak meditation from India. And after about 3 months or so, I blew out the candle like I normally do, closed my eyes, and then watched the candle light still in the image of it inside here. And it would form a ball, go into a pinpoint, and then it would start to expand. And many times it would expand and fill my whole head and give that sense of a soothing peacefulness. But on this last time that it occurred, it kept expanding, intensifying, got brighter, then it started to fill my body. Literally, the light started to fill the body. Then all of a sudden it got so intense that the sense of body form, shape, dissolved. And there was just me being in a formless light. And there was no sense of body awareness. There was no sense of breathing. There was no awareness of even a heartbeat at that moment. There was just this sense of extraordinary light, that with that light came a kind of bliss, but not a bodily bliss. It's not an easy thing to describe. It's kind of like a bliss that you can call it celestial, a celestial bliss. But in that moment, I had an innate comprehension of why I had died in the car accident. Life was preparing me for that moment, to be able to sorry, I just threw it in. I'm not feeling emotional about anything, but it evokes tears for some reason. Like I said, it's even that experience is not so far from me in this moment. It's just there, so to speak. It's just here still. I do notice that whenever I speak of some of these memories or this experience, it's like evoking it in this moment, and then my body starts to open up and adjust to it as well, as if it's starting to occur right now. So when I speak of it, I activate it. And that's why I very rarely speak of it, this sort of thing, publicly, because I start to activate something in my body. In the middle of that experience, as I said, there was no body form, no heartbeat, no breath, and it was just an extraordinary light that I knew that it was like the culmination of what I had been looking for and what the accident had prepared me for. And sometime after that, I remember the words I don't know whether it's in the Bible or whatever it's from. When thine two eyes become one, thy body will be filled with light. And that was the whole point of gazing at the candle, so that when the two eyes are gazing at the one light, then it opens the third eye and all the energy pours in and opens up what you call a gateway in the third eye. And then there's just the gracing of divine love, so to speak, but it was in a form of light. And it took me a while to be able to come back into body form, and to even to be able to breathe. Couldn't move my hands for a while. I had to somehow kind of remember how to move the hands. And then after about 5 minutes, after my eyes being open, I lie down in bed and just said, "Good night, world." Pretty much said that aloud, "Good night, world," and went to sleep. I knew that I wouldn't be coming back to that for quite some time, because I had a lot of work to do on the earth, so to speak, because of what was being gifted with and what was being revealed to me. Soon after leaving that mediumship class, I met up with a woman who was about 20 years older, almost 30 years older than myself, and she was a medium, very developed medium in Melbourne, and she gave me a message. She knew about me, and she said, "Come and stay at my place. I have a spare room, and let's go through a process this night." And so I did. And then she took me into the experience, just through the experience of it, of knowing what it's like to open up and become a channel for earthbound souls that had suffered, but were still caught up in between, so to speak. They couldn't leave the earth. And she had to be a guide and a protector for me in that moment. And it wasn't so easy for me to allow it, because you can feel the energies. There's a certain disturbance in them, kind of like a bit of twistedness. Some of them had died through maybe malevolent reasons, some just through out of pain or committing suicide. And I think there were about several different souls that, one after the next, would come through, and then after one had left, she'd bring me back again, then I'd speak about what the experience was, feeling that soul in my body. But through all that experience, it gave me an awareness how, once again, we are in an energy shift. Even though we see it, we identify this as being solid. Of course, we all know this was solid. It gave me a direct seeing and experience of recognizing that I could say yes, let go through my breathing of holding on to my physical identity, and allow my body to somehow cellularly, just energetically open up another soul to overshadow from me, and then speak through my voice box. So to listen to that, and I was there, and I'm listening, and I'm feeling my voice box move, which is a very unique experience. And because of that, it gave me another awareness of the fact that there had been quite a strong disconnect between myself and my original identity and what I would refer to as my body, being body conscious. I had a bit of a distance, a bit of a gap. So through the years, from that point onwards, for several years after that, I was going to one psychic tarot reader and spiritual teacher after the next to get a little bit more guidance, because I felt just so, in some ways, a little discombobulated from the world, very much outside of the box, and trying to figure out what do I do for my work. And interesting enough, I've just gone and moved house onto a property where there's a trade exchange. You'll understand why I'm telling this. Where there's a trade exchange, and one of the jobs I have to do is to take care of the hens and clean up the chicken poop. That was my first job at 19, after catapulted. So I'm going through a unique experience in these last 3 weeks. Like it's been re-evoked, the memory. So very interesting. I happen to be here today. I'm having a re-evocation of 19 years age. And there I am in the hen house, cleaning up the poop. I'm having hens all around me. Then I go, I can't believe this. But the amazing intelligence the great mystery has, doesn't it? Amazing intelligence, the way it reads things. We're not meant to know many things, we're just meant to experience it. That's what I'm coming to appreciate. But I'm seeing what it is evoking, and my energies, you could see, is 90% of the time I am in quite a tender space energetically when I'm in front of people anyhow, but I feel a little bit more in an extra tender space at the moment because of what life is weaving for me and evoking. Out of this actual NDE, if you want to call it that, in a way I don't call it an NDE for me. And does anybody remember a teacher called Barry Long? Who was in Australia?
I don't remember. I just remember seeing his name.
There was a teacher in Australia, he passed away in his 70s. He went through several deaths, literally several death experiences in the Himalayas, according to him, where he just went up into the mountains to find out who he was, because his whole relationship with everything fell apart. And he was a very profound teacher, very well known in Australia. So I went to see him about this NDE because I had different people in the community coming up to me saying, I think you're a walk-in. Maybe you're a walk-in. And it was that time in Australia when walk-ins, extraterrestrial walk-ins, were like the big fashion coming in. And so everybody was trying to categorise feel safe around me by saying, oh, you must be a walk-in. You know? But no, it's never been that. But can you use the water?
Yes, the water's here.
And so I went to see Barry Long, and he was a very well-respected spiritual teacher in England and here as well. And through one of his death experiences in the Himalayas, he had an extraterrestrial masters that appeared in front of him. And I'm telling you this for a reason, because it gives more credence to his capacity to see things. And they placed a little box inside of his head. Not physical, of course, but a little box. And they said that's going to help him access certain levels of Akashic knowledge. And anyhow, I went to see him about the NDE and about the whole thing of being a walk-in. And I just wanted confirmation so I could relax about it. Because I thought then I could use that and people will be more comfortable around me. They think, oh yeah, you're walking. We'll explain, so yeah, you can be our friend. Yeah, that's why I wanted to do it, literally. You know? And so I sat in front of him and in a private session, and I went into dialogue about it, and he said, no, they're misunderstanding what's happened to you. You didn't have a near-death experience. You actually died completely. And you were blasted, this is his expression, you were blasted out of this reality into your pure essence. But it was too much to contain and to recognize it when you were brought back into the physical body. But it's had a certainly profound effect on you. And then one day, a few years later, I was in India. I went to visit a spiritual teacher over there who was very famous for Kundalini awakenings. And I asked him about it, and he said something very similar. He said, it was a gift. You were given the gift of meditation many, many years ahead of having to practice it all. And your potential, what you had been in the other previous lifetimes, was just being evoked in a quantum manner. So my body was able to, obviously, to handle it. So for the next years afterwards, it was a slowly stepping into teaching forums. Small groups of people wanting me to come to their home. Doctors sometimes, groups of doctors wanting me to come to their homes or up into a retreat centre and provide certain teachings in their workshops. And a lot of the times they recognised it was more about just my presence being a catalyst for other people. Even some of the doctors recognised that. And that's what I knew, I recognised also, that there was, as my mediumship teacher had said, when she went around in one of the circles, I'm jumping all over the place a little bit here, sorry. Sorry about that, I had an NDE, sorry. Joking now, but anyhow, she went around in one of the circle meditations one day, and she was giving, her spirit guide was speaking through her, and it was beautiful presence coming through her. And she was giving different kinds of flowers to each person and describing what that flower meant for each person. She came to me and gave me a maple tree. I give you a maple tree. In that moment, my ego went, oh, why don't I get a pretty flower? Everybody gets a pretty flower, I get a maple tree. Great. But then her spirit guide went on to say, you're going to provide shade for many people that need to come underneath you because of the energy that's evoked and your capacity for channeling energy. That's why you're receiving this. And so that was from 22 years of age right up to now. It's been a slow evolutionary process of watching, no matter what workshop, what title, what group I hold, what retreat I hold, whatever name it is, and it may be dealing with certain human issues that are very relevant that people need to, but I know that I'm really inviting people to come and be in my presence, knowing that that's the first and foremost we call it tool that I have, so to speak, because that's the catalyst for activating and evoking, and maybe even acting as a window to a more subtler dimensional reality that is always surrounding us anyhow. And confirmation of that was when I was in Los Angeles for a couple of years. Just before leaving there, some of my spiritual teacher and psychic mediumship friends wanted to hold an evening gathering just for them, not a paid one, but just for a group of them. There's only 4 of them, and so I did in their own private room, and it was night time. And I remember sitting there and speaking very slowly, and there were quite often a lot of gaps between my words because it would just happen naturally, and then I would feel the transmission happening through my eyes or through my hands, because quite often there can be, when I'm working, there's literally my eyes are being used as well, and there's a transmission that happens. And at this moment I remember looking around at them, and all of a sudden each one of them, they were going right back like this. And their eyes are going open like that, staring at my body, not looking at my eyes, but looking down here. And I paused for a moment, I just waited for them, and then I asked them, is everybody okay? And they looked up and they said, oh my God, Sheila. I said, what happened? And then one woman said, you just became transparent. And I could see my cat, that was the woman who had the house, I could see my cat through your body behind you. And then her friend next to her looked over and said, I saw the same thing. So there are at least two of them that could see through my body. And then for me, that explains something about the fact of this capacity for being like a window, as a bridge, so to speak, like a window to subtler reality, because I had noticed for years prior to that, when I was holding any sort of a meditation or workshop, when I began in 1993 in New Zealand, that I couldn't even pick up even a glass of water or pick up anything for at least half an hour after I had started working. And even now, it'd be very hard for me to hold on to anything, because it's like it feels like it's subtly tingling and subtly vibrating all through me, even right down to my feet right now as I'm speaking to you. And that's what I mean when I speak of tenderness. That's the sort of tenderness that I mean. It's like, yes, I'm here, but I'm very, I'm just hanging on to being here, so to speak. And once again, I put that down to dying in the car accident. It created a disconnect between me as consciousness and the reality of the person that I identified with that was synonymous with the physical body. And so I felt like I was a 3-year-old growing up in a 19-year-old body, and I'm still waiting to grow up. So I'm still literally feeling like the same delicateness of that time is still with me at the moment. So that transparency was another one of another understanding, another awareness that had been brought to me of having a capacity out of dying in the car accident, that life wanted me to be this as I'm growing up more and more, and as I evolve with my work, as things are evolving on the planet as we know they are at the moment, I'm constantly being, as much as I want to be living in the Gold Coast, living in a beautiful mansion and all that sort of thing, I keep on getting put onto properties, living in Springbrook, in the rainforest, with lots of land around me. Right now I'm on an 8.5 acre property with beautiful land all around the Willow Valley. And before that, a 300 acre in Tioga. So life keeps on planting me these spaces to keep me away from having to absorb anything, because I have a sense that somehow I'm watching what I'm having to learn, what I'm going through my own process, but at the same time, whenever any friends come over that are working as healers or energy workers, they kind of go, whoa, what's happening to you? It's like you have energy around you. So they get a sense also that you're channeling, you're holding space for something that needs to come through you. That's why life is not activating you with lots of people that are teaching you. It's not quite time for that. That's what I was being told that again for the last 5 years since I've been back in Australia, and yet I've done my best to get events going up and down the East Coast for the last 4 years, many times. But life has here we are, now life's inviting me to be at this. So as soon as you did say it, and you talked about this, I just thought, yes, of course, I have to be here. And the event that Cheryl did come to was called the Mystic Artistry of Meditation, and that's the reason why I call it Mystic Artistry, is because that's part of what life has put me through from the time of dying, going into the spiritualist church training, and then being with spiritual teacher mentors, and doing all sorts of meditations, energy work, lots of healing processes on myself constantly, like every day almost. And every night before I go to sleep to this day, still doing something on this side of my head with the electromagnetic frequency technology. Always doing something to try and see, can I repair that part of me? It may not be necessary ultimately, but I'm still working on that. Maybe life wants me to be the way I am with all of that, just so that I can be what life wants me to be. And in a sense, it keeps me then also anchored into this reality that and so the word phrase mystic artistry is the part of my process right up to this moment. My whole life has been a whole process of mystic artistry, and I see that that's what meditation is in reality. We can learn meditation as a form of artistry, and it's a very mystic experience as well. So, and that was my experience into it. The mystic artistry of gazing at the TV and then looking at the wall and back to it and looking at the wall. It's like, what a profound discovery. By watching the idiot box, as my dad used to call it. And he used to come in and say, stop watching that idiot box. And once he had left the room, I'd say, Mum, come in. And I tried describing to Mum what's happening. And she'd just say, lovely dear. Okay. But she supported me. It was, of course, the woman that supported me as the mother principle. There was no memory, I have no memory of seeing any shapes, any shifting, anything like that. It was more about, see, right now here's the TV for me. A lot of people staring out at somebody on the TV. And then that medicine drum, that's the wall for me. So really it's not a staring and looking at, it's more of a focal point, but then my attention's coming back inside. And being aware of the breath, the calmness in the breathing, the softness of the movement of the breath. And then there's a quietness and a stillness once the breath comes in full. And when my awareness was being present with that, sometimes it would take a while before the breath would go out. And I'm there just watching. There's no outgoing breath. It could be 5 to 10 seconds, quite low, sometimes longer. So those gaps between the breaths were increasing, you could say, because my attention was coming back. So if I looked at the TV, I then also bring my attention back to witnessing what's happening inside my own body, getting a sense of, how would you call it?
Chaos.
Looking for and settling into, you could say, an absorption with that harmony that's there inside. Because obviously I'd just gone through tremendous disruption in life. Life had turned upside down, inside out. My father was actually very unhappy with me for every day pretty much after that, in spite of my condition. there's a whole, what do you call it, ego position thing with him being a top police officer and his son's just had an accident. That story, you can understand that. So I was the brunt of all that, so I'm having to come in and find the harm inside. And Mum was advancing in, with alcohol, in alcoholism. But when she was sober, she was a real mum, fantastic mum. So, but we were having this constant shift, swing. So I was always looking inside from that point onwards for the harmony, to anchor into that space. So not really looking at, seeing anything change. And even if I was seeing something, I possibly didn't register it, because really my main focus was to be back in here and to be in that stillness. The stillness of being is what I was wanting to anchor into. And that's what I've been teaching ever since, the stillness of being, how to anchor into being, anchor into being. So in a way I haven't left home, I'm still doing the same thing. You know, it's been constant. Okay. It's like I said, the first memory was waking up, and even though I'll just voice it in my way, what I know, looking down at the blood on my shirt, very vague memory of that. And then my eyes closed again, so I started to faint or go unconscious. But to this day, there's no memory of even hitting another car. I don't know if I hit another car. It was daytime when I was coming down. I don't have a memory of even the last memory. It was, according to one of our friends who's in another car, was at the side of the car for, I think he said 2.5 hours until the ambulance drivers got there. It was a busy night. You know,
must have been a weekend.
Saturday, that's right. We're out there drinking with all the boys, for God's sake. But anyhow, so yeah, no recognition. There was, like I said, it wasn't a typical NDE, near experience. I knew that it was something more, but I didn't know how to describe it and how to categorize it. So when I went to the teacher, Barry Long, he pretty much expressed it the best way I could, which was that you were blasted out not into seeing the light at the end of the tunnel or meeting loved ones and that. You were blasted into, it's like a quantum leap into high dimensional reality where you became the one. No, there was no sense of being separated. During the next few years, there was several times I was practicing astral traveling, and I was able to astral travel and start to leave up out of my body, and then look down at my body in the middle of the day. I was able to travel out of the house, and go down the street, go over the railway bridge, and watch it and see it, and be conscious of it. Then I saw the ground, I started heading to the ground, so I wanted to see what it's like heading to the ground. And then after a split second, it's like a kind of what? And entered the earth. But then once I entered the ground, it was like there was no seeing anything, because it has a certain density. That's what I'm assuming that. It was just a certain density, so I couldn't see anything. But that went over a period of about maybe 3 to 4 months of practicing astral traveling. So that was very easy, but then I stopped that pretty quickly also, because through my teachings about ascended masters and the Himalayan masters and all sorts of other things to do with Aztec masters in Lake Titicaca, all that sort of thing, South America, all the mysteries of that. There's a lot of talk about be careful of astral traveling. If you're going to want to actually go deeper, and because as you start to go deeper, as you awaken more, you've got to be careful of those realms. That's why a typical Indian spiritual teacher or master in the ancient days wouldn't allow their disciples to actually play around with the astral plane unless they were already quite developed in meditation and had a natural psychic sensitivity, and they were they were ordained to explore that level. Because there's so much shadow, there's shadowy entities and creatures, and anybody can masquerade as anybody.
Yeah.
And to this day, I've experienced a lot of all sorts of dark interference with my events and work, and travelling overseas and being targeted, being drained close to death psychically a number of times. I've experienced some pretty phenomenal things, but I always reach out to one of my woman oracle friends, and one in Seattle, Washington, who has been an oracle for me for 10 years, another famous American woman, different people like this, who, to get feedback, what's happening, and I describe it to them and say, yes, okay, there are others that are also under attack right now, be very careful. There's a huge wave on the planet, they're targeting light workers, lay low, stuff like that. That's the sort of feedback I get. But to experience those sort of attacks when they're so real, and sometimes coming through a friend, unexpected friend, or an accomplice, where all of a sudden they've just lost consciousness, literally, and they've taken over. I've seen people taken over. I've seen my mother be taken over by strong demonic looking entities. Our whole family have. And we've had to walk out of the house and go down the street and go, WTF, what's going on here? Watching our mother, like all of a sudden it's a different being. Meditation is one thing, but when you're working in a certain way, in a certain realm with other people, there's an encountering of other high dimensional beings that aren't necessarily benevolent. And there's a lot more happening on this planet than what meets the eye, than what most psychism is. I use the word psychism, psychic community may be aware of. Once I've got extraordinary psychic workers, divine sovereignty workers in Ireland, who are working with large groups, and they've just recently been attacked. And my dear friend, because he's a strong empath, can tune to you like that over the phone, he got hit by a dark beam. Some kind of a beam was sent to him because overlords wanted to knock him out because of the work they're doing. He broke out in a rash overnight, and the next morning he called me up and he was talking like a man possessed. It was like, what's going on? It's like another ball game. Another ball game. It brings in a lot of elements inside, opens up Pandora's box with communication. So that would be I'd love to respond to that sort of question and others, and to give a lot of feedback about what I've experienced over the years that might touch upon the information support for many of you. Because I've travelled into different countries, taught in different countries, lived in Hawaii for 14 years, officiated over 900 weddings. And so, but even in the wedding industry, wow, you get to see some pretty bizarre things and dark things at times. It's not all peace, love and harmony at all. I initiate the intent, you could say, to be in stillness, like very quickly, and then awareness comes back to breath. And even if there's still some disturbance, I'm aware that I'm the one who is within. I'm the one who is within. In other words, I am the one. So that's my ultimate protection. For me, I would say that it's not necessarily the case for everybody, because depending on our stages of development, a stage of what we have to learn and go through, you may be needing to use a pyramid to put over you, or put a bubble around you, or call upon an archangel or a guardian angel, or whoever you feel is closest to you. Whatever it may be, whatever's relevant for you, you work with the most. until it comes to a certain point where you know that you're being guided into, now it's about me being vulnerable in the world and finding that strength from within and really standing in that. I've been told that in some African countries, mothers quite often hold their children for the first 2 years approximately, carry them a lot, and don't place them on the ground. That's what my mother did for me. So it certainly gave me a very unique start, you could say. So that at the age of 5, and this is to answer your question, at the age of 5, I still have the memory of the first day of walking into school and looked through the school door with all the other kids. It's like, what am I doing here? I didn't get a sense of an intuitive feeling like I belonged amongst all those kids. So then when we had recess out in the schoolyard and we were all given those little bottles of milk, back in those days we were given little bottles of milk. It's just a few years ago, wasn't it? Little bottles of milk to drink. I remember having a little bottle of milk. And I remember, I can see it even right now, a few boys standing around, a couple of girls there, and they were teasing the girls. And looking at this and going, what are you doing that for? They're pretty. And they're gentle compared to you. That's what I thought. That's always stuck with me. It's like, so from that day onwards, went through state school and then high school the same, to the point where I was one of the top 3 artists in the state school, the other 2 were girls. I was an athlete, a footballer, basketballer, all sorts of the athletic sports and all that. Won many different awards, so I was very physical as a boy. But whenever boys saw that I met me or saw my presence, aggressive boys wanted to try and fight me, as boys do, to try and see if I would fight them back. I could never understand that. And so kids would literally hit me to try and provoke me. And I just stand there staring at them. And just saying, no, I don't want to get hurt, no, I don't want to hurt you. And then one time a guy hit me across the head. I was 10 years of age. And he was about this tall, me, a lot shorter. And I was a very big boy at school, very broad shoulders at the time. And another friend of mine stood in between myself and that little boy, and he was even shorter than me. And he protected me. And then in high school, the same thing happened. Kids were trying to bullies were trying to provoke me. Hitting me in the stomach, I'm standing and just stare at them. Not thinking to do it, it was just a natural thing of just presence. I was just looking into them, holding presence, not thinking about it, but it was just natural. So I feel that the mother's overflowing love from those first 2 years certainly gave me some sort of a strong foundation in that respect. And then throughout my years, that's always been the case. So I've never been in a physical fight with another boy, other than lifting a kid above my head because he wouldn't stop punching me in the arm. So I freaked him out. and I don't even, honestly, I was 14 years of age and I don't even know how I lifted him above my head. I had no thought about it, just went straight up. And the same within the last year in high school. I knew already about this. I was playing in the under-17s football team in South Croydon, and I was the ruckman, the follower, and I knew what it was like to access that second layer of energy that sportsmen quite often can tap into, even at that age. And in the last 1,500 metres race for the whole school, I hadn't practiced for it, but I decided I'll go in it anyhow. I thought I'd just get maybe second or third. I was at the very back with a stitch in the very last round going round. And all of a sudden it's like something snapped inside where, no, that's just pain. I can run. And so I started running as if the pain wasn't there, and I passed everyone until the very last stretch, and I just won the 1500. It was a movie, basically. It was like in a movie, but so that memory has never left me. The feeling of being taken by another energy in that last stretch, I felt like I was running above the ground. That's how it literally felt. So, and it was very obvious to me that's what was happening. This is not me just telling a story, looking back at it. At that age, I was aware of that happening. I knew that that was quite spiritual because our father and mother were already taking us to the Victorian Spiritual Union. We were listening to psychics and mediums, being taken to an 80-year-old woman's home, and then she's bringing out photos and showing us photos of her in the garden with little gnomes standing next to her feet. That's about that tall, but transparent, in old photographs from an old camera. There I am, 16, 17 years of age, looking at these pictures. So that I was already becoming accustomed to, well, look at life.
Yeah.
Look at the gnomes, look at the spirits. Look at the American Indian in the tree, superimposed in the tree. We used to see things like this. Would say what's most important is their heartfelt intention behind that, And even if they're working with something where they may assume that it's this, but it might not be that high vibrational frequency, it might be something else. If they're working with it from the goodness of their heart, with a beautiful intention to be of service, then that's what matters until they come into, you'd say, more of an expanded awareness. For me, overseas in Maui, I did hold an event which was called the Inner Light Group Meetup, or to do with the Inner Light. And I was endeavouring to encourage others to be able to discover the inner light more directly for themselves. And that's why I knew that my presence could also then act as a catalyst for that, because if you're gazing towards me even right now, if you were just to have a soft gaze, but not stare at me, a soft gaze, and then bring your attention back to your own breath, you'll notice that my own stillness can act as a catalyst for you to go into a little bit deeper stillness than normal, a certain calmness. So that's the beginning of being able to establish that, and then in order to go into that space of great sensitive receptivity to receiving the inner light from awakening from within. Does that make sense the way I'm describing it? Because when that does awaken, it comes with such a force, it appears to be coming with such a force, the body and the heart have to be very gently poised and truly receptive to receive that. It's no small matter to discover one's inner light, so to speak, to have that. And then you have another stage where you can experience when you go into a deepening stillness and the heart's opening up, truly opening like a lotus flower, literally like a flower. And you open up to the great mystery, all of a sudden it graces you. A true gracing with divine love. Now, this is not just a word, I could say love, but I like to use the word divine love, meaning that it's the love that actually is coming from the great mystery, where you feel as if it's showering, literally showering upon your body through the crown chakra, entering your whole system and filling you up. And when you can come to that moment to open up to that, your heart, your being, your soul will recognize what it is, and you'll cry, or you will laugh, or you go into a profound stillness, because it's quite indescribable. And it comes with a tremendous power. You have to surrender to that. But there are different stages, and that's another quality of light, you could say, but with the mystery of, you could say, infused with the mystery of love. But there's always these first stages of establishing the stillness, directing your love towards a friend who maybe has gone a little bit in a discordant state, not quite in their body, or whatever, they're in pain or in trauma, and then just gently transmitting your stillness to them. And the more we go into that, this is an answer to your question, the more we go into that, so this is for me, this is how I approach it, you know? Everybody has their own unique way. But my experience is one of is just saying yes to letting the light, letting the great mystery come through me. And sometimes it might come through my eyes. Sometimes it might be through a hand gesture. My hands might go very still in the middle of speech. And that's been happening in some groups over in Los Angeles, and all of a sudden everybody's watching my hands move. And I'm watching everybody watch my hands move. Okay. Everybody's looking at me. They're in love with my hands, darn it. I'm joking. But you understand what I'm saying by this, yes? Because it's not me, it's the Spirit. The great mystery of Spirit, you say, of love, is animating my hand. Because I'm in a state of absorption of just being here. Sharing with this sister or with that brother, and inviting them to just be, just to be. The pain, the trauma they've just been going through or have through the whole life has shunted them out of their body to some degree. So it's a bit scary to be in the body and allow the heart to just naturally flower and be vulnerable. So I invite them just to be with me. Don't have to do anything, don't have to change anything. Don't think about the light. What about love? Just be here. That's how I would work with people at times. But with each person it's different depending on the degree of trauma that they've been through in their life. And some of my friends overseas have been through, and here, as some of you may know within your own life, have been through phenomenal trauma, sexual abuse trauma, blah blah blah, on satanic trauma going way back since birth. And they're now functional adults, and they can't quite heal all that because it's like, well, how do you heal all that? Do I need to do this therapy or do this light treatment or do this treatment or do that treatment? And the more I started to work with trauma, especially over in the States, I started to see that it had to be very gentle in increments. Because as a very well-known trauma therapist in Oregon, Ashland, Oregon, said to me, who had experienced satanic sexual trauma from 4 years of age for 10 years, in a school that was a church that are all throughout the US. Satanic churches hidden in the school. No one knew. We're talking about hundreds of thousands, if not millions, girls and boys. Mind control programming, abuse, torture. But by the time that the school's finished, they flick a switch inside through certain words. Different person. Greek mum and dad gone. It's like, oh, they're okay. Nobody knows. Parents didn't know. So this is the sort of friends I worked with who helped me to understand how to work with trauma and how to not take big quantum leaps and think, oh yeah, let's get rid of all that. We can clear all that right now. Just do this, just do that. With so a lot of my friends still have that sort of attitude. But when you've spoken with somebody who's been through that level of years of trauma, it's You can trigger trauma within the trauma, and then you've lost the person. Could be decades again before they could even return. Anybody can relate to what I'm saying here? So in other words, gentility. And the most gentle thing to start with, stillness. In that, I'm willing to come out of concept also. Drop my concept. Drop my ideas. What to say, what to do with that person or this person or the group. Even working with the group of people if I'm working with the group. All different kinds of locks. You need different keys. So it's mystic artistry. This is why I've used that terminology. You can start with one technique, but then you might have to sand it here or there for another person, reshape it for another person. More patience for this person, help them to be more patient. Remind everybody that you're perfect where you are right now. It's a journey. So you learn all this, when you're working with trauma especially. And of course, that any sort of dying, any sort of near-death experience, or what I've had also, any glimpse of it is going to activate a high degree of sensitivity in your psyche, in your body as well. So then you're operating through, I'm operating through my vibration, you could say, through what my capacity is. I know what I can activate in a single person. If you were to sit in front of me, put your feet on top of my feet, you could activate a lot. You may not be able to handle it, I don't know. And yet another person could. When you're hearing my voice right now, for example, you can hear there's an absorption with listening to my voice. When you hear the voices stop, it's just a quietness. So we're all being immersed in that. Now, that's why straight after the car accident for me, sitting in front of that TV was possibly my first training, or the beginning of my training in a sense in this lifetime. Didn't matter if it was Laurel and Hardy on TV or whoever it was, or Cheech and Chong. It was still just imagery, and I'm listening to the sound. I became aware of this. I'm listening to the sound of the voices. It's going from one show to the next, and then an ad's coming on, then the show's on, then another ad's coming on, and all I'm doing is listening. As you're listening right now, I'm listening to the sound of the TV, then I'm looking up at the wall. A reality check to check in with the stillness by gazing at the wall. Back to my breath. As you're gazing towards me as the speaker. But you see that death, the near death or the death experience, is really a window of opportunity to remember. Not just to have lots of maybe psychic experiences opening up or getting in touch with a psychic gift, but there's a lot more available. It was about, at the age of 22 was the awakening of that third eye with the inner light, my body being filled with light. So that was like the beginning, 21 years of age, that was the beginning of my adult life, being initiated by the light, awakening inside. So I don't know what it's like to be a typical man, apparently. my former girlfriend told me. She got upset with me one day because I was talking with men about what it's like to be a man, and she got angry, looked at me, and she said, "Stop comparing yourself to other men. You're not a typical man." And I just went, "Oh." But anyhow, so that, but then 2 years later, I was with a spiritual mentor, a teacher of meditation, who knew how to awaken Kundalini as well. And on this one particular day, it did awaken. And from that point onwards, for days afterwards, there was a process of deepening awakening to the point where finally it awakened so much it would shake me off my feet and I'd fall over backwards. Mostly when I was dancing to music or putting on beautiful music. I loved dancing and celebrating to beautiful music in those days. And then my body would shake me off my feet from the Kundalini awakening. And then at a certain point, I witnessed a man who was also into that state, but then he went into a state of what they call in the Sufi mysticism. He went into a state of mystic prayer. And it was a sight to behold. It was exquisite to see it. It touched me very deeply inside because his eyes were transformed. The look of him, he was putting his hands up just like you do, like they do in Islam. You know when they do this, and they Allah, Allah, and they put their head down to the ground. Well, they're imitating something that is a potential reality. When I saw this one man who was part of this spiritual group in Perth, who was a meditator, went into a state of mystic prayer, he went up like that, and he just started crying and laughing, uncontrollable. And you could see that there's some great mystery around him, and it activated something in me, and I knew inside, that's what I'm looking for, that's what I want, that's what I want. I want to be immersed in that. And then I spoke with him afterwards about it all. But through the Kundalini awakenings, that was already preparing my body to open up to that. And then I found by being in the presence of even a tree, beautiful music, with my spiritual teacher at the time, just to be in his stillness, that would activate it. And I'd go into prayer, meaning that my heart would just naturally open up effortlessly, without control, experience complete 100% openness. And it's like my being was saying yes. It was surrendering to the great mystery, saying yes, yes. I let go of all my trying and doing and trying to be this and that. And then all of a sudden, well, it felt like rain was coming from the air, and I had to open up my eyes and look around. I was in the house at first, and it literally felt like there was this water falling upon my body. But it was really tingling energy, I call it. It was grace. I was being showered upon. And so I didn't think about it, my hands went up like that. And I started breathing, and then my head went right back like that, just naturally, because my throat wanted to open up. And then I could breathe more of it in. And it's like the body became saturated with that. It's almost like you could say, like being like a baby with in the mother's arms. It had that kind of feeling multiplied by 100-fold. But it was that dying in the car accident and realizing that I had lost absolute control, I had no control. That's the first thing it gives you an awareness of when you die. Just die. I've got no control now. Or even after you come to, or even years after the death. How did that happen? How did that happen? No control, just looking out the blue. And many other things in life like that kept happening for me. Whereas how can I have to let go of control, I have to let go. And then recalibrate, refocus, let go again. So death was constantly there in the background around me, so to speak. The intelligence of life was saying every so often you're going to die, little mini deaths. Now that you've had the one big death there, you have many little deaths. And they're all preparing you so that you can also be of service and help others to let go. To die before you die and to live before you die. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Looks like we've come to the